Maria. I knew there was little hope for the ship. I watched helplessly through the lighthouse windows as waves thrashed the vessel without mercy. What good would my light do for them? The wind and rain slammed against the glass hard enough that I feared it may shatter. I could only imagine what the unfortunate souls aboard were experiencing on the torrential seas. I held my position all through the early morning hours, hoping against all odds they would survive the squall. The ship grew smaller and smaller as the vicious breakers pulled it further from shore. Once I lost sight, I knew they were doomed. As the storm subsided and the sun began to rise, I surveyed the sea from the rocky coast. It was hard to believe these tranquil waters were the very same responsible for the violent outburst hours before. I'm not ashamed to say I wept once the tide began bringing debris to the banks. The wreckage brought me to my knees with anguish. The loneliness of my rocky outpost made their demise feel like I had lost someone close to me. I gathered some of the larger pieces, planning to build a memorial on the beach, when something caught my eye. It was moving quickly through the water. I squinted to make out what it was, and realized it was a wooden chest. The water beneath began bubbling and foaming, moving ever closer to where I stood. Startled, I let the wood fall from my arms as something slowly surfaced. Eyes stared back at me, then faces emerged. I felt frozen to the spot as dozens of swollen, discolored bodies clambered up the rocks with contorted limbs, and I tripped backwards, falling to the sand in a heap. A mob of drowned men and women surrounded me. They looked at me indifferently while I feebly begged them for mercy. Finally, the crowd parted down the middle, and a couple approached, carrying the chest between them. They placed the heavy trunk at my feet. Confused, I looked up at them, still fearing for my life, when an unmistakable sound came from within. I gasped as the man lifted the lid and the woman pulled out a bundle of blankets. The swaddled infant cooed, reaching up for its mother's hair. The father stood behind the mother, gazing down at their beloved child with smiles on their faces. After some time, the mother crouched down, gently handing the child over to me. The father placed his hand on my shoulder, looking deep into my eyes, wordlessly communicating his wishes. I nodded to him, the only gesture I was capable of. He nodded back, and the mob turned away. I held the little girl to my chest as the corpses returned to the sea, finally looking down at her once they disappeared from sight. Enormous turquoise eyes stared back at me beneath a wild mane of curls. The crashing of the tide whispered her name to me. Maria. Maria. What's Wrong with Tabitha? Written by the Prowler. Me and Tabitha had been friends since we could barely walk. Our mothers had been friends since childhood, so we spent our entire lives growing up together. Not long after high school, Tabitha got pregnant by a guy named Bill, who we went to school with, and gave birth to a baby boy she named Ben. I'd never seen Tabitha so happy, so madly in love, but sadly, Bill did not treat her and the baby with equal love. No matter what I did or said, I could not get Tabitha to leave him, even though I knew that abuses were going on. During this time, Tabitha also was becoming quite friendly with a girl named Awi, a nurse she befriended while she was giving birth. Awi seemed like an all right enough girl. We would all hang out at Tabitha's house to try and cheer her up after one of the latest blow-ups with Bill. But there was just something about her that seemed off. The way she moved and talked, the things she would say, she was just very eerie. This continued until one day we were called over to Tabitha's house, and when she opened the door, we could tell Bill had done his worst this time. Tabitha let us in, limped to the couch, and we sat and talked. Except for Awi. She stayed absolutely silent. Tabitha proceeded to tell us what happened and that he was shacked up at some roadside motel with some woman. The whole time we were there, Awi just sat and listened. It looked like she was thinking of something, just sitting there, with a look that could kill. After a few hours, it was time to leave, but before we left, Awi leaned over and whispered something into Tabitha's ear. I don't know what was said, but after a minute, Tabitha's face seemed to go blank. She looked pale. Awi got up and walked out the door. I said goodbye to Tabitha, but she said nothing, just slowly waved goodbye. I chased after Awi to ask what she whispered to Tabitha. She gave no reply. I angrily tried to ask again, but she moved so quickly she was at her car before I could finish the sentence. I looked at her through the window. It looked like she mouthed, "I'm ending this." Ending what? I thought. I jumped in my car and followed her. We drove and drove. It seemed like forever we were on the road. We're heading towards the highway. She's taking us towards the motel, I thought. She pulls over on the side of the road and gets out and heads into the woods. I pull over, get out, and follow. I can see her heading towards a building at the end of the tree line. She's going the back way to the motel. I stop and watch her from behind one of the trees. She moved quickly to the room on the end. Bill's car is parked in front of the door. She kicked it open and jumped in. She was in there no more than 5 minutes when I heard the blood-curdling screams. I watched as Awi jetted out the room covered in blood, heading back into the woods. She stopped right in front of the tree I was hiding behind. I looked down. Her feet. Her feet were hooves. They were goddamn deer hooves, I know it. I watched in horror as she bounded away into the forest. I went towards the motel room and peeked in the door. Blood was everywhere, and Bill and a woman's body were laying dead on the bed. I held in the vomit I could feel rushing up my throat and ran off towards my car. As I drove home thinking of what to do, I decided to head towards my grandfather's home. He would know what to do. I remember a story of something similar to this he would tell me when I was a child, but couldn't remember the name. When I got to his house, I told him everything I saw and everything that led up to it. About Tabitha and Bill, Awi, everything. He told me when he was a child growing up on the Cherokee Reservation, his grandfather, who was a medicine man, told him about the Deer Woman, a protector of women and children, and men who protect women and children. But when a man hurts women and children, she enacts vengeance or even murder on said man, and can be identified by her deer hooves or legs. He even told me Awi means deer in Cherokee. I know what I saw. My grandfather 100% believes what I saw. Awi was never seen again, and when I saw Tabitha and told her what I had seen, she laughed it off. She strangely didn't even care. Bill was gone, a man who she defended over and over again, no matter what. She's changed. Something seems off. She's still sweet and caring, But there's something eerie about her, and for some reason, her legs are always covered now. If someone even gets near them, she bolts away. I dare not think it. What is happening to my friend? What is happening to Tabitha? The Lighthouse by jesusgivesmethehorn. I moved to the island a month ago. I chose to live alone in this lighthouse under the need of solitude, to escape the people of my past. I only have one job, and that's to guide the ships when they pass. Although it's been a month, of the 20-odd ships I was meant to guide, none have passed by. The woods to the south have been causing me distress at night. I can see shadows, outlines of people moving between the trees, but when the light moves over them, they aren't there. There are more now than there were a week ago, but the light keeps them away. I haven't heard from the mainland in 3.5 weeks. The radio is working, but no one's been manning the line. The last communication I had with anybody was cut short. The operator mentioned something about having to be with his family. I'm not worrying. I have food, and I wanted solitude. What worries me is that the things in the woods are getting closer each night. They're getting braver. I write this because the power has been unreliable today, and the light is failing. The Raven Mocker, written by the Prowler. Have you ever heard of the Raven Mocker? My grandfather asked me, as a fire kissed his face, surrounded by the darkened living room. No, Grandpa. What is that? A Raven Mocker is a witch in Cherokee folklore that steals the life of the elderly to become younger, and I believe that is what's causing the deaths in our town. A witch? Grandpa, please don't be ridiculous. There's no such thing as witches. You're too old to believe in such superstitions. Hold your tongue, boy. Don't you dare make fun of your heritage. Oh, please, Grandpa. I barely have any Cherokee in me. It doesn't matter how much or how little you have. Cherokee blood still flows through your body, and our family has always believed in the Raven Mocker. When I was a child, my great-grandfather would tell me stories of an old witch that preyed on his reservation when he was a small child. Fine, Grandpa. But why do you think there's a Raven Mocker here, causing these deaths? All 5 deaths have involved the elderly or the sick, and when their bodies were discovered, bits and pieces of their heart were lying next to their bodies, looking like it had been chewed upon, but there were no cuts or any markings on the flesh. It looked to the naked eye they died of natural causes. You see, grandson, the Raven Mocker consumes the hearts of their victims and leave no traces on the bodies. They move as a fiery object in the sky, followed by a strong wind. Both were seen and felt at each of the deaths. When you hear a raven's call, Not long after, a death is sure to follow. Oh, Grandpa, this is all just too ridiculous. Look! Look out the window. The trees are swaying back and forth. There's obviously a strong wind out. Is she coming? Ooh, there's a lantern floating in the distance. There's the fiery light. Is she coming? Stop it, grandson. That's enough of your jokes. Ooh, Grandpa, what is that I hear in the distance? Is that a raven calling? I guess she's almost here. Oh, Grandpa, you and your superstitions. It's just a regular night around here. Grandpa? Grandpa? The Anti-Incubus by EITFullah. So, Caleb, Dr. Lee began, tell me about this reoccurring dream you've been having. 18-year-old Caleb, under the influence of an experimental MDMA drug used on patients suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, began mumbling. It starts on the same day, my 10th birthday. We are all gathered in the backyard. I'm opening presents. The first two presents are normal action figures. The third present is... Caleb paused. Take your time, Dr. Lee said. The third present is a severed human head. My severed head. And then what happens? I look around the party. I'm surrounded by people I don't recognize, and they are all dressed in black robes and pointy hats. They start chanting. What do they chant? Caleb began trembling. Needles, knives, needles, knives. They come closer and closer. They start stabbing me, and then I wake up. But when I go back to sleep, it's the same dream all over again. Dr. Lee nodded. Do you remember your actual 10th birthday party? Yes. Did anything bad happen that day? My friend broke one of my action figures. Beyond that, it was a normal birthday party. Dr. Lee raised an eyebrow. My 4th grade teacher put me in time out, one time unfairly, but I never experienced nightmares about that. It isn't normal for past trivial matters to manifest into recurrent, horrific nightmares. So, Caleb, we're going to run some functional MRI scans tonight to observe your brain activity while you sleep. Does that sound good? Okay. That night, in the MRI control room, Dr. Lee and his colleagues observed through a glass panel of fast-asleep Caleb being fed into the MRI machine. For the first 2 hours, Caleb's brain activity appeared normal on the imaging computer screens. Around midnight, Dr. Lee began to observe unusual brain activity. Then one of Dr. Lee's colleagues screamed. Dr. Lee looked forward. Standing beside the MRI machine was an inhuman figure, donned in a black robe and thin pointy hat. "Call security!" Dr. Lee shouted instinctively. "Make sure he doesn't leave the room!" The porcelain white figure turned to Dr. Lee, its cold black eyes connecting with Dr. Lee's. It grinned and then vanished. After sending Caleb back to the psych ward, Dr. Lee spent the night's remaining hours reviewing camera footage with hospital security guards and police to figure out how someone could have entered the secure room. Once morning arrived, Dr. Lee was so exhausted from the night's events that he momentarily fell asleep in a chair, in the MRI control room. Within moments, he found himself in a shadowy dungeon, hanging upside down by hooks pierced through his feet. In front of him stood his fourth-grade teacher, Mrs. Waltz, dressed in a black robe. Mrs. Watts hissed, "Looks like time out wasn't good enough for you, huh? Now, I'm going to have to punish you with needles and knives." Mirrors, author unknown. Okay, I'm a skeptical atheist. I don't believe in ghosts and am submissive of anything paranormal. Having said that, I'm fascinated by the way our brains are designed. No matter how rational we are, we all have moments in the middle of the night where that bump you heard just might be something more sinister. Anyway, that's enough of that. Here's the story I wanted to share with you guys, and it's 100% true. A couple of years ago, I discovered lucid dreaming. For those of you that don't know, lucid dreaming is dreaming while being conscious and being able to affect those dreams. Since Inception came out, I imagine most of you know something about it. The method I was attempting is called DILD, Dream-Induced Lucid Dreaming. The way you achieve it is to perform reality checks constantly throughout the day. Then you do one in a dream. It fails, and you realize you're dreaming. For instance, you could try to read. While dreaming, the part of our brain that processes written language doesn't work. So you do this enough times in the day, and eventually the habit passes over into your dreams and helps you realize you are dreaming. So at the time, I was doing several different reality checks, including looking in a mirror. If you look in a mirror during a dream, the image supposedly looks wrong. It warps and can even transform. This is a risky check because if you see something scary, your dream can turn into a nightmare. It sure caused me a few nightmares. I was at home alone, and I decided to do a few reality checks. I scanned the front cover of a magazine. The text came up fine. I checked to see if the lights were working. Electronics or something our sleeping minds struggled to replicate. Again, the check passed. Then I decided to do the mirror test. I stared at my reflection, and nope, it was Wait. I stared closer and realized my eyes weren't looking at me. Slowly, they came up to meet mine. Now, I was excited. I was dreaming. I lifted my hand up to double check. Sure enough, the reflection remained stationary, and this was where I started to feel uneasy. The reflection smiled to reveal an impossibly wide grin. Suddenly, I felt a sense of dread, but I couldn't look away. The room and the mirror burst into flames, and then I realized it wasn't just the reflection. It was my front room. I could feel the heat. My reflection just widened his grin even more, his face all teeth. My chest was pounding, and I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. I tried to remind myself it was a dream, but it was useless. Then I heard a slam, and all was back to normal. I looked around. The room was fine. My wife came in. She had just gotten home from work. The slam was the front door. I remember I was still dreaming and told my wife how I could fly if I wanted to. She just looked at me like I was an idiot. I lost some confidence and did some more reality checks. All passed. I wasn't dreaming. This is where What I said at the top comes in. As a skeptic, I have to rationalize this. My worldview depends on it. It couldn't have been a ghost, demon, time echo, etc. I tell myself that I fell asleep staring into the mirror on the wall, and my wife woke me up seconds later. Though I wasn't even tired, let alone sleep-deprived, enough to fall asleep standing. And my family has no history of narcolepsy or other sleep disorders. Now, when I hear a bump in the middle of the night, I find it hard to tell myself it was nothing. And if I go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I avert my eyes from the mirror, because who knows what you might see staring back at you. Leopold's Waltz of the Dead. There was a young composer named Leopold Montgomery who resided in the lush landscape of Savannah, Georgia, during the mid-1800s. He lived on his family's estate, a blue-painted manor on a grassy knoll, surrounded by fields of tobacco. He was a struggling artist, toiling up in the attic on his compositions, hoping that he might write the next masterpiece. Long into the nights, he would burn the midnight oil, even to the point of his fingers starting to cramp and bleed. No matter how hard he tried, however, he just could not succeed. Piece after piece were rejected. He was practically shunned by the finest households in Savannah from ever playing his pieces at future balls, parties, and catered affairs. Thankfully for him, his family was rich, so he was able to press on. But he was becoming despondent, melancholic, and angry, and most of all, desperate. Until one night, however, during the winter of 1839, after hours and hours of working on his latest piece, he descended from his attic studio with a zest in his step, smiling and filled with a joy at what he had just done. He told his family that he had just composed his finest work yet, that he had finally accomplished what he set out to do, and that was to write the next classical masterpiece, and he called it the Waltz des Morts, the Waltz of the Dead. His family was skeptical, however, for they too, just as others in the community, knew that his music just wasn't very good. He begged and he pleaded for his parents to let him play it at their famous Christmas ball that was fast approaching. They were hesitant, to say the least, especially his mother. Their Christmas ball was known throughout the South as being one of the most lavish parties of the year. The who's who would be there. She did not want to be embarrassed. But that is exactly why Leopold persisted. For he knew some of the finest people in music would be there, and he needed to be heard. His mother finally relented, and he was allowed to perform at the upcoming ball on Christmas Eve. He waited and waited, and the night finally came. It is said he came out to the piano wearing a half-skeleton mask and dressed in black with purple trimmings. Witnesses report his parents to have stood in the corner of the ballroom with a look of nervousness festooned across their faces, and those in attendance condescendingly clapping, waiting for him to fail. He bowed to the crowd, then sat on the bench, flexing his fingers before placing them on the keys. He then whispered, "Now dance to my waltz of the dead." He began to play, and almost instantly the guests began to dance. He caressed the ivory keys with haunting strokes, and played like he never had before. It was said that the likes of Mozart and Chopin could not have composed a finer piece. The music that was emanating from the piano that night was haunting, and some of the most beautiful the people in attendance had ever heard. Once he was done, the people clapped and cheered. Leopold then rose from his seat and bowed once more. He then turned to his parents. He grinned at them and bowed. They were smiling and clapping, very proud of their son, I'm sure. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, without notice or warning, they both collapsed, dead, on the ballroom floor. The doctors and attendants rushed to their side to try and give aid, but it was too late. Instantly they died, with no cause and no reason. The community was saddened to lose two of its most influential members, but they were very excited to celebrate their son. Word of his talent began to spread far and wide, and he was asked to perform at all of the finest get-togethers all throughout the South. The finest families welcomed him back to perform his haunting waltz, and perform he did. He played beautifully every time. However, at the end of every performance, after he had bowed to the owners of the house to show his appreciation, they keeled over dead without warning, clapping and smiling one moment, then dead the next. People were becoming frightened and came to the realization of the only common trace linking these tragic incidents, and it was Leopold and his deadly waltz. Some of the finest people in the community were taken after hearing the haunted melody, including his own parents, and the remaining members of Savannah's high society did not want to risk the chance of being next. Watch out for Leopold's grin and his waltz of the dead, the people would warn. It became bedtime ghost stories told to the children, warning them to be wary of the man in black playing his haunted piano. Leopold was once again shunned, and he was banished from the community. Rumors began to spread, asking and wondering how a mostly inept artist all of a sudden create a musical piece of art and could play beautifully seemingly overnight. They claim he sold his soul to the devil in exchange for his talents. The other rumor was he was gifted his talent from the devil so he could claim the souls of the people he played for. Leopold was called the devil's composer and death's musician after the tragic events. He could be heard afterwards in his seclusion, playing his waltz all through the night, frightening whoever would pass. So no matter what you believe, whichever the rumor, if the man in black asks to play at your catered affair, politely turn him away, for you may be next to join the waltz of the dead. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.